you probably know there's 4 kinds of Agave Utahensis. There's Kaibabensis, there's Utahensis, regular, degular, then there's nevadensis and eborispina. But what exactly is the formal taxonomy of Agave Utahensis? And are there unknown, undocumented varieties or subspecies of Agave Utahensis still out there waiting to be discovered? That's what we're talking about today, the taxonomy of Agave Utahensis. Agave Utahensis has a really interesting history, both before Europeans came to the Americas and after. In fact, I did a video called The Who's Who of Agave Utahensis, where I talked about some of the scientists, botanists, researchers, and explorers that played a part of the history of formally describing to Western science Agave Utahensis. And so that's what we're talking about today, is the taxonomy of Agave Utahensis, the categorization of the different types of Agave Utahensis, the history, how that taxonomy has been built up, and then where that taxonomy stands today and what questions still remain. So most folks know that there are 4 types of Agave Utahensis, right? There's Agave Utahensis Kaibabensis, or formerly Agave Utahensis subspecies Kaibabensis. There's Agave Utahensis subspecies Utahensis, which I call regular, degular Utahensis. And then below that, there are 2 varieties. And these are the ones that are the internet favorite ones, the ones you generally see on Instagram and on YouTube. And that's Agave Utahensis subspecies Utahensis variety nevadensis, and Agave Utahensis subspecies Utahensis variety eborispina. Most folks just call it, like I just mostly call those, nevadensis and eborispina. But let's understand a little bit more about how that taxonomy, how that categorization works. And we'll start with the history. I'm actually going to start with the most recently formally described taxon, which is the singular of taxa, form of Agave Utahensis that was described. And that was actually Agave Utahensis subspecies Kaibabensis. Now, Kaibabensis is the largest form of Agave Utahensis. It grows on the Kaibab Plateau around the Grand Canyon, and it was actually the last taxon to be formally described. And it was formally described by Susan Delano McKelvey, actually FDR's cousin, in 1949 in the Journal of the Arnold Arboretum. And she noted that she'd found earlier photographs that had been taken by researchers and published in some novels and stuff of plants that were Kaibabensis, but it hadn't been named yet. And in fact, she says that she had originally just sort of considered Kaibabensis a colossal form of, a big form of Agave Utahensis. But she noted some differences, and so in 1949, like I said, in the Journal of the Arnold Arboretum, she formally described Agave Utahensis subspecies Kaibabensis. And I list that one first because while it was the last to be formally described, it was probably the first to evolve. And I've talked about this a bunch on the channel before, but all the other kinds, the 3 other taxa of Agave Utahensis, regular, degular Utahensis, nevadensis, and eborispina, all have variable inflorescences. They have basically one of 3 different types of flower structures: spigot, paniculate, and racemic. But Kaibabensis only has paniculate inflorescences. And most experts believe that that variable inflorescence that the other 3 have is an indication that they're the results of relatively recent field hybridizations. That is not that long ago, not that many hundreds or thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago. 2 different species of agave cross-pollinated in the field and created the hybrid that we know today, or the hybrids that we know today, as subspecies Utahensis, regular, degular Utahensis, eborispina, and nevadensis. But the fact that Kaibabensis does not produce that variable inflorescence probably means that it's not the result of a relatively recent field hybridization. It's probably a bit older than the other taxon of Agave Utahensis, and thus is likely one of the 2 parent species that made up the other 3 taxon of Agave Utahensis. And the other possibilities of what we probably won't actually ever know what the species are that created the hybrids, the other 3 taxon of Agave Utahensis, but good guesses are, a Kaibabensis on one hand, but then also like Deserti, Perrii, McKelviana, something like that, that at one point in that past tens of thousands-ish years ago shared some range with Agave Utahensis. So Kaibabensis was the last to be formally described, like I said, 1949, but it was in fact probably the first to evolve. So we go back then to the first formal description of any of the Utahensis species, we got to go all the way back to 1871 and a report called Botany of the United States Geological Exploration of the 40th Parallel. Basically, there was an exploration of the newly acquired 40th parallel, basically a big chunk of the American West that had been newly acquired by the United States government. There was an expedition that went out and, wrote a bunch of things. It was mostly a geological expedition. And then they collected some plant species. And famous botanist George Engelmann, who was not on the expedition but was able to examine some of those samples that were collected, plant samples that were collected, wrote an addendum or an add-on to that report, the botany report, from that expedition in 1871, and he was the first to formally describe Agave utahensis, what we now know today as Agave utahensis subspecies utahensis, or again, what I lovingly refer to as regular degular utahensis. Now I call it regular degular utahensis because compared to nevadensis or eborispina, it doesn't have the super long terminal spines or lateral teeth or anything like that. It's not generally not got a super cool blue color like a lot of high altitude nevadensis plants, and it's not huge like Kaibabensis can. So as Utahensis goes, it's kind of normal looking. It's still a really cool looking plant compared to almost every other kind of agave, but as far as Utahensis goes, it's not the most impressive, or it's not the most notable. So that was 1871 when George Engelmann first formally described Agave Utahensis. But then in 1886, A. Isabel Mulford, in her doctoral dissertation, combined a bunch of the different private notes that Engelmann had produced, describing several different agave samples, Agave Utahensis samples, and she combined them into a single Agave Utahensis category, species, right? And not a whole lot more is known about her, unfortunately. She was super interesting, and I talked about her a bit in the Who's Who of Agave Utahensis. And then in 1929, nevadensis was first described in the Annals of the Missouri Botanical Garden by Eva Mertel-Rusch and J.M. Greenman. And basically they were sent samples, or the Missouri Botanical Garden was sent samples of a plant that was collected out west. They looked at it, they analyzed it, and they decided to name it Agave Utahensis variety nevadensis. And then in 1943, in the Cactus and Succulent Society Journal, the journal of what's now the Cactus and Succulent Society of America, it's still publishing a lot of the most important works in Agave Utahensis and in Cactus and Succulents in general have been published in it, great journal. But in the 1943 issue of that, eborispina was first formally described by J. Pickney Hester, again from a sample that was collected by him this time, but just north of Las Vegas. So that's where we are for most of the 20th century, through most of the 1900s, is that there are 4 known varieties of Agave Utahensis. There's Kaibabensis, there's Utahensis, subspecies Utahensis, regular degular, and then there's nevadensis and eborispina. And then Howard Scott Gentry, legendary agave botanist Howard Scott Gentry, in 1982 writes his book, Agaves of Continental North America. And in there, he sticks to those 4 taxon, and he labels them Agave Utahensis subspecies Kaibabensis, Agave Utahensis subspecies Utahensis, Agave Utahensis subspecies Utahensis variety eborispina, and Agave Utahensis subspecies Utahensis variety nevadensis. And that's one of the first sort of important books on agave that I read. It's probably most folks' most notable book on agave that they've read. It's probably the most important book on agaves, at least the agaves of continental North America that's ever been written. Gentry is a legend, basically. And he's sort of the, when you're discussing a topic with somebody, you can just go back to Gentry, and Gentry's usually the one that everybody considers as right, or at least I would consider as right. And so that's kind of where when I talk about Agave Utahensis and I call eborispina a variety, nevadensis a variety, that's because that's what Gentry said, and I'm going with Gentry. But in the 21st century, since the year 2000, there's been some change up in that categorization, in that taxonomy, which brings us to, like I said in the beginning of this video, the fact that there are still some questions about the taxonomy of Agave Utahensis. So in 2001, Urs Egli, in the Illustrated Handbook of Succulent Plants Monocotyledons, he writes that both varieties, and he's speaking of nevadensis and eborispina, are best regarded as mere dwarf forms with large elongated spines from montane limestone outcrossing. So what he's doing there in that book is he takes, instead of having eborispina and nevadensis be varieties, be formally listed as varieties, he's calling them just forms of Agave utensis subspecies utensis. So according to Egli in 2001 in that book, Illustrated Handbook of Succulent Plants Monocotyledons, there are only two taxon of Agave utensis. There's Agave utensis subspecies Kaibabensis and Agave utensis subspecies utensis, and the nevadensis and eborispina are simply varieties. And I find that approach very, very interesting, mostly because when I go out in habitat and I look at nevadensis plants and I look at the descriptions of nevadensis that I've read in the formal descriptions that I've talked about in other locations, and I look at nevadensis plants or I look at eborispina plants and I compare them to those descriptions, they don't seem to be a binary, this is definitely nevadensis and this is definitely eborispina. There are plants that are, yeah, definitely this is nevadensis, definitely this is eborispina, but there's a lot of plants sort of in the middle, right? There are nevadensis with pretty long spines. There are eborispina plants with kind of short spines as eborispina plants go. There are green nevadensis plants. There are bluish eborispina plants, right? There are, nevadensis typically grows up at higher altitudes. There are locations where eborispina grows up at super high altitudes, right? And so that's one reason why those nevadensis and eborispina don't seem to me to be super binary. They don't seem to be, it's either in this category or it's in this category. They seem to be sort of on a spectrum. And plants can be certainly way over to the nevadensis side or way over to the eborispina side, but there's a lot of plants just sort of in the middle that display traits of both. And another point that I think makes Egli's argument that there's simply forms of Agave utensis subspecies utensis more attractive, or at least questions the idea that there are two distinct varieties or only two distinct varieties, is the fact that Agave utensis grows up in sky islands, right? It can't live on the hot desert floor that most of the Las Vegas Valley is because it's too hot and too dry. So it lives up in mountains. And so most populations are really isolated from each other. And so when you go from one population on one sky island, and then you go over to another sky island several miles or tens of miles away, those populations look really, really different, right? There isn't just one eborispina look, and there isn't just one nevadensis look. So what I think those two things, the spectrum of nevadensis to eborispina and then the isolated populations do is make an argument for either there are a variety of different forms of Agave utensis subspecies utensis, and we can talk about different characteristics that the different forms have, primarily long spines is the important one, or there are a bunch more, or at least some more, Agave utensis subspecies utensis varieties. And in fact, we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the video, but when I interviewed preeminent agave expert and breeder Kelly Griffin, he brought up the fact that he kind of thinks that there may be more unnamed Agave utensis subspecies utensis varieties. But before we get to that, let's talk about what happened in 2022, right? So in 2022, in a journal called the Cactus Adventures International Journal, a gentleman named Hofstadter actually broke up the taxon even more distinctly with regards to nevadensis and eborispina. And so rather than calling them Agave utensis subspecies utensis variety eborispina and Agave utensis subspecies utensis variety nevadensis, what he does is break nevadensis and eborispina into their own subspecies. So according to Hofstadter in 2022, just 2 years ago, Agave utensis is actually 4 different subspecies. It's Agave utensis subspecies Kaibabensis, Agave utensis subspecies utensis, and then Agave utensis subspecies eborispina and Agave utensis subspecies nevadensis. Now, that is the most recent, I guess, formal taxonomical change that has happened to Agave utensis. I'm not such a big fan of that though, because again, like I said, nevadensis and eborispina do not seem to be a binary, like it doesn't seem this plant is this subspecies and this plant is this subspecies. Like Kaibabensis is that subspecies. I don't know that there are transitional forms between Kaibabensis and nevadensis that occur out in the wild, really, right? I've certainly never come across an Agave utensis where I'm like, oh, that could be Kaibabensis, but it's you know what I mean? That doesn't really happen, to my knowledge at least. Where it does happen a lot with nevadensis and eborispina. So I'm not such a huge fan of breaking them up into subspecies. Again, in my interview with Kelly Griffin, he mentions that sometimes botanists will default to naming species and subspecies because then they get to have their name listed as the authority, the taxonomical authority, anytime those subspecies are listed in an academic article. But back to what Kelly said, which I find super duper interesting.
Yeah, without revealing too much information, there's that greenish form of nevadensis that is on the westernmost edge that occurs in those areas. I don't think that that's closely related to the southern nevadensis forms or the Nopa eborispina forms. I think that's a different entity. There are big blues as well, in Nevada. So
yeah, because of those sky islands and the fact that those populations in those sky islands are really isolated by the hot, dry desert ocean, if you will, in between them, it is possible that there are some unnamed forms or varieties or maybe even subspecies, although again I'm doubtful of that, of Agave Utahensis that are related to, similar to eborispina and similar to nevadensis, but not quite either one of them. He mentions, like you heard, the big blue plants and a few others. And so part of my project eborispina that I'm going to be beginning in late October and carrying on into November will be to visit as many known eborispina locations as possible, including some potentially undocumented, eborispina locations that haven't been listed in any academic sources. And it might be really exciting if I were to find or I could document some candidates for separate distinctions for either different variety or different form of Agave Utahensis subspecies Utahensis that's similar to eborispina but totally different. And I'm not really expecting to do that. My main focus of Project Eborispina is merely to survey how many eborispina plants are out in the wild. But that would certainly be a really interesting side goal or thing to happen while I'm out there. And I will definitely be publishing the photos and videos that I take out there onto this channel. And so I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. What do you think about Agave Utahensis taxonomy? Are nevadensis and eborispina, are they subspecies? Are they varieties? Are they forms? Where do you come down on that? And thanks for watching.